Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. You know that feeling, don't you? That heart sting when someone else receives the very thing you desire? When your best friend announces her engagement, when your sister says she's pregnant, when your coworker gets the promotion. You tell yourself you're happy for them, but you feel a hint of something else. That something is envy. Kermit the Frog says it's not easy being green, but our next guest says otherwise. Tilly Dillehay holds a degree in journalism from Lipscomb University. She's been the editor of a weekly newspaper and lifestyle magazine and now serves as homemaker and mother to 2 little girls. She writes at justinandtilly.com and contributes to the Gospel Coalition. She's the host of the Green Workshop, an event for women on the subject of envy held in local churches. Tilly's husband, Justin, is a pastor in a small town east of Nashville. Readers can take the 7 Shades of Envy quiz to discover the areas where they struggle with envy and learn how to create healthy relationships at www.seeinggreenbook.com. Here to discuss her new book, Seeing Green, Don't Let Envy Color Your Joy, is Tilly Dillehay. Tilly, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you, and it's great to have someone else that's willing to take on Kermit the Frog. I preached a message with Kermit up on the screen. He says it's not easy being green, but you and I both know it is really very easy to be green, don't we?
Yeah.
And we kind of taking on that paradigm that Kermit says it's not easy being green, but our natural response sometimes is that green with envy. Take us back to your upbringing, and you're married to a pastor. You have a faith journey of your own. What was that journey like, and when did that begin?
Well, I was raised in a Christian home. I was one of 7 kids. We were raised in the Nashville area, homeschooled, all of us. So just I would say very strong biblical background in our home. And I went away to college when I went away. I went to a local college, but stayed on campus when I was 16 years old. And I began to have a very difficult time while I was there. By the time I graduated from that school, I was calling myself an agnostic, and just really struggling in many areas of life, alcohol and just eating disorder, just very miserable. I was an unhappy person. So it was in the year or so after I graduated that I kind of dug in my heels as an agnostic and was developing that worldview. And a few weeks into my parents finding this out about me, they suggested that I go out and do some biblical counseling with a pastor that we used to know out here in the sticks, which where I live now, it's kind of the middle of nowhere, about an hour east of Nashville. But there's a pastor out here who we had known. We'd gone to this church back when I was a little girl, and always kept up. So I actually moved into the house with him and his family for a few weeks, and basically brought him all of my questions and concerns that I had with the Christian faith, which he answered with Scripture. And at the end of about 2 weeks' time, I was a Christian. I was a converted believer. And I was between jobs as a college graduate in 2008 when there was no work. So I ended up moving out here to this tiny town just to be a part of this church, because I knew that I was a baby. I needed to be fed, and I was ready to get out of town, basically. So I moved out here, and I kind of thought I was also getting away from all men anywhere, because there were really no single men in the church. But there was one single man in the church, actually, a pastoral intern named Justin Dillehay, who I married 2 or 3 years after that. So now I'm really here. And we have 2 little girls, a 3-year-old named Nora and a 1-year-old named Agnes. And we are here. My husband's now full-time with the church, and we're really invested in this community out here. So
you wrote a book about envy.
Yeah.
Most authors write from personal experience, and certainly your journey is no different. As I read this, You recount a lot of feelings, and envy is a soulish. So people understand this is a soulish thing. It's you have mind, will, and emotion tied up in that soul. That envy is something that we need to understand is a emotional response in many ways. Kind of what was the motivation for you to write a book about envy?
Well, it was a huge problem for me. I mean, it was a huge problem. I told you before, I'm one of 7 kids. 5 of those are girls, 2 of them are boys, and my whole family has been in and around the music business since I can remember. So when I was 15 or 16, I put out a CD of jazz cover tunes, and I had sort of this dream of being a jazz singer, and never really pursued it. Just never had the work, the drive to do it. And while I was in college, the 2 girls just below me in age, my 2 sisters, they started a band. And it was a wonderful thing that they were doing. They were writing music, and they ended up joining up with these 2 brothers and having a band for a good long while. But when I had to sit there in the dark and listen to them play their music, knowing that I had wanted to do this but had never done it, and that what they were doing was truly beautiful, it was one of the most painful experiences that I have had, at that time. And I couldn't understand why. I didn't really have a name for it. I didn't know envy. But it went on for years, and it deeply interfered with those relationships. These were the playmates of my youth, and we became basically estranged because I couldn't bear to be around the glory that I was seeing. So around the time that we were all getting married, the 3 of us all got married within the same year. And there's something about weddings that just seem to define relationships. And when we were going to stand up in each other's weddings, hardly knowing each other anymore, something about that flipped a switch in me where I said, this is a huge problem, and I've got to address what's going on in my heart. So I think it was around that time that the name, that calling the sin what it was, envy, first started. And it was around that time that I read an essay by C.S. Lewis called The Weight of Glory. You're probably familiar with it. And it's not about envy at all, but he talks about just the fact that we will stand before God at the end of time and be approved of or disapproved of by him, and that we will wear glory that he is bestowing on us. And he talks a lot just about the appetite for glory and how strong it is in our hearts. And something about that helped me to understand why this was so very painful, why it seemed like it was striking at the heart of who I felt I was. My very identity was being threatened by the beauty that I was encountering in other people. So that was the language of borrowed glory came out of that. And that's sort of the structure of the book, is talking about inequality, the fact that God has placed glory in creation, and some of the most glorious things that he's ever made are human beings, because we're made in his image. And so when we encounter those glories in other people, we react to them in different ways. But one of the ways we may react is with hatred and resentment, and that's envy. So
we hear the words envy, jealousy, covetousness. Mm-hmm. Are they the same, or are they different?
Yeah, I think it's sort of common misconception to use jealousy and envy interchangeably. They're not the same, but it's not a huge deal. We all know what you mean. But jealousy, and I lay this out very briefly in the book, jealousy is a feeling of being threatened. Something that you actually have is being threatened. Maybe your husband, someone's flirting with your husband, so there's a way to be jealous and to it actually be a righteous feeling if you're protecting something that you should be protecting. God is sometimes, jealousy is attributed to God, so it's not a necessarily sinful feeling all the time. Whereas envy is about something that someone else has and it's bitterness and resentment that they have it. Um, Covetousness is also, I think, different from envy in that covetousness just wants that thing that you see. It's all about, it's very kind of simple feeling of just desire, whereas envy takes it personally that they have that thing and would be happy to see it taken away from them, even if you didn't get it yourself. So it's, yeah.
Are envy and anger indelibly connected to each other?
Yes, I think so. I don't think that I've ever put it in those terms, but I think they are. You're reacting in anger that God gave something to someone else that He decided not to give to you.
You know, when we talk about soul healing, we take a look at the sin response to an offense or the sin response to a trauma. And envy is a sin response to an event or an occurrence or a trauma. And for you personally, it was traumatic that a dream that you had was being fulfilled by another related to you. And it was something that ate away at your, really at your soul, became
Yeah.
a bitterness. And is this that bitter root that God talks about that we can't let wrap itself around our hearts?
He does talk about that, and you're right that it's very corrosive the way that you're describing it. It does eat away. It's not the kind of sin that just stays put, and if you ignore it, it'll go away.
You talk about glory and what you call borrowed glory,
Hmm.
and you make a connection between glory and envy. I think it's a very deep concept and one that our audience needs to understand so that as we take them through the seven specific kinds of envy that you identify in the book, that they're able to see God's creative and redemptive power in this whole process, because this is a process. It's actually a book of deliverance. How to get past this envy, how to get delivered from this envy so that God would be glorified. Is that how you might describe this journey?
Yeah, and I would say that was what my journey was, in the writing of this book, which was basically what God used to help me address the envy that was in my heart. The writing and the confessing to these childhood friends was really what got the ball rolling, at least. But if you want to talk more about the borrowed glory specifically. I do. Yeah, so it's very important. It was very important to me to understand this. Why is this so powerful? When I meet these glories in other people, why is it that I can't help but respond to them? And I first talk about glory in the book in terms of experiences that we've had so that people will have a better picture of what I mean by glory, by God's glory. So I talk about nostalgia, how we have this longing for another land or another time, and that is just a hint at the greater longing that we have for God, for His glory. I talk about art hinting at glory, these stories that we have such an appetite for. That's our appetite for the story, for the glory of God and the story that He's telling. And falling in love, that's a hint at glory. It's an experience that kind of sweeps us away. So I have a little sort of list description to help people understand what do we say, what do I mean when I'm talking about glory and our appetite for it. But to go from there, God's glory spills over in His creation, and it's spilled over into the people that He made in His image. So when we encounter these glories in other people, they're very real, and there's something that God intentionally placed in them. It wasn't an accident that this person is so intelligent or that person is so charming. He did that on purpose, and He placed inequality into His creation on purpose. It's a painting that He's created among these people, And you can't have a painting with everybody the same shade of orange. Everybody cannot be identical if you're going to go with the way God made the world. But it's that inequality that is also so painful, because if we value one of these glories and we meet somebody who has more of it than we have, um, we have a choice in how to respond to that, because it's something he did on purpose.
Is this something that the enemy thrives on? Is this comparative world that we've created with Instagram and Pinterest and Facebook and Twitter and more followings and more YouTube views and the desire to become viral? I can't imagine why I would want to be equated to something that was like the Black Plague or pneumonia or HIV. Those are things that are viral. I can't imagine the positive spin being put on, yep, I'm contagious, but yet we've fallen into that trap of using negative terms to describe positive things. That just kind of twists, and those that don't know the Word of God aren't even recognizing some of the things that you and I are discussing here. This is certainly a tool that has been used throughout the Bible of the desire of someone wanting someone to see someone destroyed because of what they had, so that they would lose what they had. We see it with beauty, we see it with talent, we see it with following, we see it in many ways, and it seems to be a pretty effective tool to divide families and friendships and households and communities and churches, for that matter.
Churches, yeah. Yeah, envy lives in the pew too. Envy is as old as the fall, so it's not like we needed Instagram or Facebook to become envious people. We have always been envious people, but it's definitely a different kind of a game now than it was. It's a different, and I do think that that those platforms are being used by Satan gleefully, but he's always been gleefully right in the middle of envy. So
you talk in the book about the unbearable inequality, understanding envy. You quote Harold Coffin and say, "Envy is the art of counting the other fellow's blessings instead of your own." And I think that that's a brilliant statement that captures a lot of what people struggle with. Is we spend way too much looking at the other person as opposed to the introspective relationship, which is unique for every believer. Your relationship with God is completely different. Your gifting is completely different. It is not better, it's not worse, it's just different. When you do spiritual gifts inventories, they're different. When you do IQs, they're different. You have a musical gift, to a musical ability to make music. Right? I have the musical ability to make noise. That's my gift. I'm the audience. That is where I am greatly gifted when it comes to music. My executive producer plays 7 different instruments. He's a lead singer. He does voiceovers. He's a studio musician, and the best thing that I can do for him is be a part of the audience, because he will barely let me sing an opening line of a song before he just kills the mic. But I'm not envious of that. We have different gifts, and I'm charged with helping him develop his gifts to their fullest, and he's charged with helping me develop my gifts to the fullest. That's what a partnership with God and any close relationship is supposed to be. that cord of three strands that we see King Solomon so eloquently put. But the art of counting the other fellow's blessings instead of our own seems to come into that area of fairness. Where did fairness enter the biblical narrative?
It's not really there, is it? It's not really there, except that every person has been a passionate advocate for fairness when they are the ones concerned. I think we all love fairness when it has to do with ourselves.
It's a misappropriation of the Word of God.
Justice, yeah.
You know, God is the arbiter of justice. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. He's a loving Father, but He does provide within His Word the bestowing of different gifts on different children, different blessings on different children. Of the two people groups of the Bible, both are chosen. My people, the Jews, were chosen to protect the oracles of God, and the Gentiles who came to faith in Jesus were chosen to provoke Israel to envy, so that we might know what you have and provoke us to want to have that to come to faith. There is a choosing, and there are different giftings and different choices that God has bestowed on two different peoples, and that's all there are in the Bible. There's only two. Ethnic and ethnos become a whole modern Greek concept that has no place in the Bible. But yet we've allowed ourselves to get caught up in this trap. And you've defined in the book 7 different kinds of envy. And I want to make sure that we cover those, because they are important in this narrative. And you start out with the envy of the body.
Yeah.
Calling it borrowed dust.
Dust, yes.
Yeah, borrowed dust.
Dust is where it came from, and
right.
To dust it will return. By calling all of these glories borrowed glories, I think I'm just trying to emphasize the fact that they're temporary. Some of them will be restored to us later on, but many of them will be temporary. And so with the glory of the body, this is just very straightforward, the envying a person's physical beauty or health, maybe, or maybe athletic talent. But it may seem like a shallow thing, but it's a big deal to some people. It's been, at times in my life, a very big deal to me. So I have stories to tell about that in the book, but it's just a matter of, not a matter of pretending that beauty isn't real in other people, that it's somehow so subjective that everyone is equally beautiful. I think that's not true, but just relegating the glory of beauty to we may put it up here and it really needs to be, way down here. We know that beauty is vain. So, that's what I have to say about that in the book.
Well, King Solomon said it very eloquently. He said, meaningless, meaningless, meaningless. It's all meaningless. Vanity is meaningless. Yeah. That what is beautiful today will fade and age and go back to its original state of dust. People aging gracefully is,
Just a way of saying they're dying slower or something.
Exactly. We come up with all these clever ways to paint with the color that's not green, when the color in the bucket of every one of these is green.
Yeah.
It's interesting that do we have another color associated with anything else? Do we have a color for jealousy? Do we have a color for hatred? Do we have a color for lust? It's funny that we have a color, green, with envy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Never thought about that.
So in God's spectrum of colors, of the rainbow, of the primary colors. You're not purple with something. You're not blue with something. Well, I guess your blue is sadness.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's true. That
right.
holds.
Red, I guess, if you're choking. Uh, but
I've associated red with anger, I think, at times.
okay, red with anger.
Yeah.
Green with envy seems to be the more common
Yeah.
phrase.
I think that it comes from Shakespeare. I think that it was a Shakespeare quote that kind of took hold in people's imaginations, where everyone really does associate green with envy now, and it's all just because of him.
Well, quite the influence. We're talking with Tilly Dillehay, author of Don't Let Envy Color Your Joy. The book is called Seeing Green, and it is very much what her opening quote is, and that is in her chapter on her second chapter, envy is the art of counting the other fellow's blessings instead of your own. I think that we all at some point in our life, until we reach a certain level of spiritual maturity, find ourselves longing to not just have what someone else's have, but for them not to have it. And that's where the envy part comes in. It's one thing to be desirous of something, but the other hook part of that is I'm desirous of it and I don't want you to have it. And that becomes the part where it goes over the line and becomes that sin response. We're going to hear more about these 7 kinds of envy. What kind of envy do you struggle with? This questionnaire, 7 Shades of Envy quiz, that you can take for yourself at seeinggreenbook.com. And let's be honest with ourselves that many of us have struggled or even continue to struggle with envy in our lives. And it takes one bold Tilly Dillehay from the sticks of Tennessee to bring it to our attention and make us aware of something that may be gripping you right now. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll hear more from Tilly Dillehay about seeing green, how not to let envy color your joy. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only 2 ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The Teaching Archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, Prophecy in the News videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Tilly Dillehay, author of the newly released book, Seeing Green, Don't Let Envy Color Your Joy. Tilly, welcome back to the program.
Thanks.
Tilly, we've been talking about envy, and this is kind of your story. And what's so beautiful about this is these are real confessions from a real transparent person that came face to face with a sin in her life, the sin of envy, and decided that you were going to break through to the other side, claim victory through the shed blood of Jesus. But in order to do that, to really complete the story, you had to share it, because you began to realize that you were not alone in this journey, that many are walking along the same path that you walked along. And if you can get to the other side with as little or as large a support system as you had in rural Tennessee, if you can do it, then certainly they can, and grab a hold of your hand, and you'll walk them through this journey. You have a number of envies. I think that there are 7 specific kinds of envy that you identify in here. One of them is in your chapter 4, Borrowed Magnets, the envy of charm and influence. How did that play out in your life, and what story do you tell in regards to that particular type of envy?
Yeah. Well, this story actually didn't make it into that particular chapter because I do talk in the book about my envy of my sister's talent, which was a big one. I talk about personal envy of beauty. That was, that story gets very personal. And I had another friend where competence was really the main thing that I was envying in her. But this was years ago when I started writing these things. And it's funny, in the last few weeks of turning in my final manuscript to the publisher, late last year, I suddenly became aware that I was harboring a new envy towards a new friend that I had not identified. And this time it was a different glory. It was the envy of charm and influence, and which I call, barred magnets in the book, because it's about how these people just have this power to draw others to themselves, to themselves, just with their humor or their being candid with other people. It seems like there's some people who just look at you and make you feel seen and known somehow, and they exert real force over those around them. So I am in a season of life where female friendships are very difficult for me, I think, with small children, but also just trying to learn it as a skill and finding that I'm not great at it. So because that is the thing that is looming large in my life right now, I'm not really ambitious to be in music at this moment in my life. So that's not such a painful thing. But suddenly I realized this woman who is a part of my circle is a friend magnet. Is everybody wants to be this woman's friend. So this may sound a lot like middle school or something, but these are grown women with multiple children, and yet there's a dynamic among these friends of people being more or less desirable as companions, and everyone wants to be friends with this person. Everyone wants to include her in, this or that. And just as silly as it sounds, that had become a really big thing. I noticed myself making little jokes about it to my husband. And I think that was the point when I realized, oh my goodness, I've got another one. I've got another live issue here, after having confessed and felt such freedom from these other envies and restoration of other relationships after having confessed to those friends. Suddenly here it was again a few years later. So just it was a great moment to just realize that my sinful heart has not been totally transformed, and the struggle is not done away forever just because I wrote a book about this. I'm still going to have to catch the sin as it arises and deal with it. So confessing to God, I talk about in the book, confessing to God, and also sort of a way of deciding whether you need to confess to the object of your envy, which of course for the envious person is the last thing that you want to do, because in order to confess envy to somebody, you have to be ready to admit to them that you thought they were better than you were in an area of life that you particularly value. So that's number one, which is very painful if you're already envious. And then number two, to say, and because I thought you were better than I am, I resented you for it, and I wanted you to be less great than you were. So having already been through this several times, I was ready to go and have this conversation with my friend, because I realized in this case there was not going to be another way to move forward with my relationship with her, and it had interfered with the relationship. She did not know what it was. She didn't know what was going on, and usually they don't. I think usually when a relationship has been broken by envy, you are hiding it with everything that you have. So they may not know what it is. They just know something's up and something's weird, something's strange between you. So when I went to tell her about this, she said, I knew that there was something that was just, making it where we couldn't be intimate with each other. And, but I didn't know what it was. So, and she freely and graciously forgave, as has every person that I've ever had to confess envy to. No one's ever met me with a hard heart on this one. But,
Tilly,
so yeah.
is this an outcropping of insecurity? Is there a direct correlation between our inclination to think that we are unlovely, unlovable, unworthy, insecure? Is this the next degree up the scale of insecurity turns into envy.
Yeah, I mean, I do think a very insecure person is going to be very prone to envy. Envy is the sin of the underdog. It's a sin of pride, but it's a sin of frustrated pride, not pride fulfilled. So it's your worth as a person has been threatened because you can't handle interacting with someone who's better than you are in some area of life that you value. So yeah, it's the sin of there's always a feeling of inferiority that comes with envy.
You know, it's interesting in the corporate world. And I spent 35 years in the corporate world before I went to ministry. Was to surround yourself with people who are better than you are, which will then raise the whole. If you raise the level of the water, then all the boats rise at the same time. And there were still people that excelled in superstars, and same way in athletics and those kind of things. But I guess in the corporate world, it's competitive, and in a competitive environment, you try to fight your way through it, and envy doesn't really become a part of it. But if you take a look at the kingdom and you take a look at the body of Christ, then there does, because there is that issue of and you know, it was exhibited by the disciples. Which one is the favorite? He likes me best. You know, I'm envious of your relationship. Not only do I not want you to have that relationship, not only am I jealous of the relationship you have, but I want to take that from you, and I want to be the one that has that relationship. So we do see biblical examples of it. We saw Saul, who was envious of David.
Yeah, that's an illustration actually in the book that kind of pops up in surprise.
So we're kind of at the part of the interview where we've identified that there's plenty of examples of envy out there. Now we put it kind of in a perspective that this is a blessing that someone else receives that you don't want them to have, and it's purely because you don't like that they have it. You've taken no inventory whatsoever of what you have, and it wouldn't even occur to you that you might have something that they may be envious of, because you actually have such a low opinion of yourself in this equation that it's now so outwardly focused that there's no inward examination. You've reached that point where you finally had to search yourself. You had to take on that role of David that said, "Search me, O God, and see what's inside of me." That had to be a difficult journey, but on the other side,
it's a wretched place to be. That point of searching and seeing what envy looks like, because it's a hideous looking thing. There's nothing fun about it. There's so many sins that have at least some kind of a pleasure factor. Envy is no fun at all.
How did Justin journey through this with you?
Poor Justin. He had to watch me come to terms with what was going on, and put a name to it, and stand patiently by without telling me that it was all in my head and really I was the best person, really I was, like, I guess I'm sure there were temptations to deal with it in a different way, but he stood quietly and allowed the Lord to work, I think. And then in the writing of the book, he did much more than read the chapters and, let me know how they were. When we first started, I was going to do a co-write with him. So we started the book that way, trying to write it as a co-write, and ended up having to kind of abandon that because of the voices. But there are chunks of work in the book that are actually my husband's writing, usually the ones that are the most solid and theologically grounded, probably.
Well,
but he's been a witness to the whole thing.
Well, the good news is when we get to chapter 10, put off, put on, we start kind of turning the corner.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, at this point in the book, we've talked about the why and the sort of deeper implications of the envy, but there's a point where you've got to get practical and roll up your sleeves and really do battle with it, because it's not going to just go away on its own. So in that chapter, I talk about 4 virtues to put on that comes from a verse that talks about putting off sin, putting on the new person that's being formed in us. And so I talk specifically about what you can be putting on as you're putting off the sin of envy. The first thing being love. So just envy is hatred, really, of a person and wishing them ill. So you're going to have to learn to love them. And I just talk about practical things you can do to kind of fake that until you make it. One of which being, look at the glory that you've been avoiding, that you've been turning your gaze away for a long time. Sit there and look at it and really appreciate it, and praise them openly. Praise them to their face about it. Don't be worried about the fact that you might be causing them to be prideful or something. We're always very worried about the pride in other people, But praise is a way of getting yourself on their team, and that's what you need to do. So praying for them, pray for them in a way that you would pray for yourself. And that means not just praying that the Lord would protect them from pride or whatever spiritual sounding things we might come up with. Pray for the spirit, but pray for the whole person, and that they would succeed the way that you would pray for yourself. Pray that they would actually succeed in what they're doing. And then put on the virtue of humility. We talk about envy being a sin of pride. The virtue of diligence, because one of the legs kind of gets knocked out from under envy when you know that you have put yourself to the task that God gave you to do, not their task, but your task, and that you've really worked it with all your might. If you've done your best at what He gave you to do, one of the most painful things about envy sometimes is the knowledge that you could have done the thing that they're doing. Like with me and my sisters, I didn't care enough to actually go through the trouble of being rejected and learning to be on stage and all that stuff. And I knew that when I was sitting there watching them. I knew you didn't go after it. You didn't do it. So diligence in whatever row you've been given to hoe, go ahead and do that. And then transparency. Yes.
Yeah, you make a very good point there. I heard a conversation where a young man went up to a great virtuoso and said to them, "I wish I could do what you do." And he said to him, "No, you don't." And he said, "How can you say that?" He said, "Because if you wanted to do what I do, you'd be practicing 8 hours a day like I do."
Yeah.
We tend to project and look at gifting and talent as something which is just a gift from God. But my executive producer's daughter is a wonderful flautist and piccolo player, and competed as a freshman against the seniors for her chair in the orchestra at the University of Alabama, and wound up as 3rd chair in the University of Alabama Orchestra. But she practiced 6 hours a day on top of being an honor student.
My goodness.
So if you really want that, you have to be willing to do the work. You can be envious of her gift, but you can't be, you have to be realistic about what it takes to cultivate and develop those gifts.
Yeah, I read, somebody said once that a lot of people say they would like to write a book, but he said a lot of people would like to have written a book. They don't want to actually write a book. They want to have written one, which makes a lot of sense. It's that you see the finished product and you want to be associated with that product, but you don't necessarily want to do what it takes to create it. Yeah,
you're exactly right. The last 2 chapters kind of sum up the positive side of this whole equation. Chapter 11, the eyes that matter, while we need God's approval after all, and then the glory you will wear forever, are kind of very much interrelated. It's kind of the confession that God didn't make a mistake when he made you, and God didn't make a mistake when he gifted you, and God didn't make a mistake when he made you unique. And the gifts that he gave you and the blessings that he gave you might just be the envy of someone else without you ever even knowing it. But getting to that place was a long journey for you. How many years did it take you to get to this point?
Oh, goodness. Well, I started the book 5 years ago and finished it, I think, a few years after that. And I'm at a point of restored relationship and peace with those relationships that had been broken. But this place of recognizing what God has given me and being grateful for them, that comes and goes. I think it's part of the Christian walk. It's satisfaction in what he's doing in your life, and that's not really just now I've got that down. I'm not in that situation at all. So I'm learning.
So your message for those that struggle with envy, as we wrap up this interview, you've got about 3 minutes that I'd like you to kind of speak directly to those that maybe even during this program have realized that maybe they needed to take that 7 Shades of Envy quiz at seeinggreenbook.com, because they are struggling with some of the things you discussed. What's your message for them?
Well, you don't have to live this way. One of the great privileges that we have as Christians is that we can actually do battle with sin and win, which is a privilege the world doesn't have. But you may need to do very specific battle with the envy that you're feeling towards a specific person through confession and repentance. But I think in the long haul, the way that you're going to be transforming your heart to be the heart that rejoices with others who rejoice, it's all comes down to your satisfaction in Christ. And the deeper in love that you fall with him, and the more rich food that you get from that relationship, the more joy you have in your life. And you will not be the kind of person who is always measuring the joy that you see around you and wondering if it's more than the joy that you have. When you're joyful, you know that you're joyful. When you're in love, you know you're in love. And that's what Christ gives us. It's the true answer to envy, I believe.
So you have a whole new palette, and you can take green off your palette.
Yeah.
Right, and paint your own portrait in the way that God has painted you, and look at a reflection of Jesus instead of a reflection of the natural. Tilly Dillehay, author of Seeing Green, Don't Let Envy Color Your Joy, has gone through this journey and still is on this journey. And it may be a lifelong journey as new challenges come her way. But she now has the tools to keep it in check, to not let it go years, or not even to let it go months before she begins to address it. And you too can have that same ability with the tools that she gives you in this book. First, you have to identify it, then you have to conquer it, and then you have to really master it through the only one that can walk alongside of you, and that's Jesus himself. And he will carry you across the victory line so that you no longer have to live an envious life, but can live in the glorious richness of the one who created you, the one who made you fearfully, beautifully, wonderfully, and perfectly made in his image. Tilly Dillehay, author of Seeing Green, Don't Let Envy Color Your Joy. Thank you so much for sharing your story here with us on Revealing the Truth.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.